There's a moment in many relationships that feels confusing and difficult to explain. Everything feels normal, communication is consistent, the connection feels stable, and then slowly, something changes. Replies get shorter, energy feels lower, the emotional tone shifts, not in an obvious way, not dramatically, just enough to be noticed. And what makes it harder is this. Many men don't explain what's happening when they start pulling away emotionally. They don't announce it, they don't label it. They often don't even fully understand it themselves. From the outside, it can look sudden, but internally, it's usually gradual. Men often process emotional pressure differently than they express it. Instead of talking through uncertainty in real time, many begin by regulating internally. They think, they step back, they create distance, not always to disconnect, often to regain clarity. Emotional withdrawal is not always a signal of lost interest. Sometimes it's a signal of overload. When expectations rise, when commitment starts feeling more real, when the emotional stakes become higher, some men shift inward rather than outward. This isn't about avoidance in a clinical sense. It's about regulation. Men are often conditioned to solve problems privately first. If something feels uncertain, they try to stabilize it internally before discussing it externally. That internal processing can look like distance, less texting, less emotional expression, more time spent in routines, work, or silence. From the outside, this can feel like detachment, but internally it may feel like recalibration. There's a key dynamic that's often misunderstood. As emotional closeness increases, so does perceived responsibility. And responsibility can trigger reflection. Questions begin forming quietly. Am I ready for this level of commitment? Can I maintain this consistently? Is this moving faster than I expected? Am I still grounded in my own life? These questions don't always mean doubt about the person. They often reflect a need to realign with identity and stability. When a man feels his autonomy shrinking too quickly, even in a healthy relationship, he may pull back slightly to restore balance. That doesn't mean he wants distance. It means he wants to feel grounded again. Attraction often depends on both connection and autonomy. When one side begins to feel heavier than the other, a correction can happen. And that correction often looks like emotional withdrawal. Not because the feeling disappeared, but because the pace changed. Another factor is emotional pressure that builds without direct conflict. Subtle expectations, unspoken needs, shifts in tone that signal increased seriousness. Even when those signals come from a positive place, they can create weight. And some men respond to weight by stepping back rather than leaning in, not as a strategy, as a reaction. They don't always explain it because they're still figuring it out. They don't always communicate it because they don't want to create unnecessary tension. And sometimes, they don't have the language for it. So they process quietly. The misunderstanding happens when silence is interpreted as disinterest. And then the response becomes more intensity, more questions, more emotional conversations, more attempts to clarify. That increase in intensity can unintentionally reinforce the need for space, which creates another feedback loop. He pulls back slightly, more pressure appears, he pulls back more to regulate. From the outside, it looks like he's losing attraction, but often he's trying to restore internal balance. Attraction is influenced by how safe someone feels inside the connection, not just emotionally, but psychologically. If a man feels that his independence is still intact, his attraction often stays stable. If he feels like he's being absorbed too quickly into expectations, he may pause. This pause is rarely explained in real time, because explaining uncertainty while still processing it can feel destabilizing. So distance becomes the default language. Less words, more space, more internal reflection. This is why emotional withdrawal often feels confusing. It doesn't match the previous energy. It doesn't come with a clear reason. It doesn't always signal an ending. Sometimes it signals adjustment. The goal is not to eliminate space. Space is part of regulation. The goal is to understand what space often represents. When emotional distance appears, it doesn't always mean something is broken. Sometimes it means someone is recalibrating their internal balance. Attraction tends to remain stable when both connection and individuality exist at the same time. Too much distance weakens the bond. Too much pressure weakens attraction. The middle ground is where stability lives. Understanding this changes the reaction. Instead of immediately assuming loss of interest, you begin to see patterns. Instead of escalating intensity, you observe the emotional rhythm, and that observation alone often reduces the tension in the dynamic. Because attraction is not only built through closeness, it's also maintained through space. And when space is allowed without panic, many emotional shifts naturally stabilize over time. If you're interested in learning more about the deeper emotional patterns that shape how men attach, pull away, and reconnect, there's a resource linked below that explores these dynamics in more detail.